So thanks everybody for joining us today for Building Trust Through Ethics, Best Practices for Nonprofit Association Professionals. We appreciate you being here again. Apologize for the last minute snafu, but here we are and we're raring to go. So I'll turn it over to Asha. This is AXC, Association Xchange. I'm Sherry Singer, the coordinator and founder of AXC. Thank you very much for being with us today. For anyone who is not able to join us, got the link at the last second, etc. These sessions are recorded, so you will be able to go back in and take a look at the session after it occurs. So thanks again for being with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Asha so she can introduce our speaker.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I have the pleasure of introducing Shawna Strickland. Shawna is a PhD CAE, a registered respiratory therapist, educator, and association professional. After over a decade in clinical care, she transitioned to higher education, functioning in education leadership at Southern Illinois University Carbondale and the University of Missouri Columbia. In 2010, Dr. Strickland served as a clinical ethics consultant in the University of Missouri Center for Health Ethics. She transitioned to association management in 2013 and currently serves as the Associate Executive Director, Programs at the American Epilepsy Society, where she leads the clinical, research, and education divisions. Dr. Strickland is also an adjunct faculty member at Rush University, teaching leadership and education courses in the Doctor of Philosophy in Health Sciences program. She has a special interest in strategic planning, leadership, development, and learning management. And it's my pleasure to turn this over to Shawna.
Thank you, Asha. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate everyone joining me today. So thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're joining me for this particular session. I have a passion for ethics in a variety of spaces, and I've been really interested in applying ethics to the association space. So as we kick off this discussion of ethics, I want everyone to keep this one guiding principle in mind. No one individual is to profit from the organization. Losing sight of that principle has led to many unethical behaviors in the nonprofit world. So, moving to the next slide, move slide. There we go. So to that end, our conversation today is going to focus on the ethical standards applicable to the association profession and the decision-making frameworks available to us. We'll discuss codes of ethics and their impact on our organizations, and we'll apply that decision-making process for the most ethically supported outcome. So why is it important to talk about ethics, especially in the context of associations? Ethical behavior specifically builds trust within our association and with our external partners. So adhering to these ethical standards and promoting ethical practice helps prevent misconduct and promotes accountability within the organization, as well as protecting and enhancing our organization's reputation. It contributes to the long-term success of our organization by fostering a positive organizational culture and enhancing our member satisfaction. But what about ethical leadership? Is ethical leadership important? Well, of course it is, right? In 2023, though, the ASAE Ethics Committee conducted a survey of members, and they received responses from association leaders representing a range of types and sizes. And that survey found that nearly 100% of respondents indicated that ethical leadership was moderately or very important to their work. And none of the respondents indicated that ethical leadership was not part of their day-to-day work. And that's the part that I want to focus on today. We can talk about lofty ethics goals, but I want to really talk about our day-to-day work and how ethical principles play in. So to that end, I want to look at the ASAE standards of conduct. And I do not have the URL on this slide, but if you go to the ASAE's website and type in standards of conduct, you will be taken to this particular site that has these 7 standards. We respect and uphold public laws that govern our work. We champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are honest in conducting the member's business. We respect the confidentiality of information gained through our work. We act fairly. We foster an ethical culture through our work, and we take responsibility for our conduct. And those standards can be distilled into 4 concepts: respect, responsibility, justice, and honesty. Pardon me. Respect is demonstrating a high regard for ourselves, for others, for the resources that are entrusted to us. These resources could include people, money, reputation, the safety of other people, and natural or environmental resources. And that environment of respect engenders trust, confidence, and performance excellence by fostering mutual cooperation. Responsibility is taking ownership for the decisions that we make or that we fail to make, and actions that we either take or fail to take. And of course, the consequences of those actions. Fairness or justice is making decisions and acting impartially and objectively. Our conduct must be free from competing self-interest, prejudice, and favoritism. And honesty is understanding the truth and acting in a truthful manner, both in our communications and in our conduct. I feel like while this is probably the most obvious ethical principle, and the one that most quickly damages our professional reputation, it's not necessarily easy in practice, especially when we have to balance keeping confidentiality of information, both from an operational standpoint and from our members' perspective. So we have to really balance those pieces. And of course, DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion pieces play a role in our aspirational concepts. And really, this boils down to an equitable environment that addresses bias, both intentional and unintentional, harassment, and discrimination. So it's really essential for us to identify and remove these barriers from our workplace. I want to take a step back and acknowledge that even though we have these wonderful guiding principles and these standards of conduct, our reality is that we cannot avoid conflicts. Therefore, we have to make sure that we have clear rules, policies, and guidelines in place for when something happens. So that's our code of ethics. And our code of ethics serves as a set of guiding principles that establish our values, they state our values. Our values, of course, are implicit within our mission and vision, but it puts to the forefront the organization's values, the standards, and ethical behavior that is expected of our members, of our staff, of our key volunteers, everyone involved with the organization. So our each code of ethics is going to be a little bit different, but there are some commonalities among these codes of ethics. The code should demonstrate the organization's commitment to honesty, transparency, and ethical decision-making, as well as provide guidelines for the identification and the process for disclosing and managing conflicts for the board, for volunteers, for staff members. They typically include standards for professional behavior and mutual respect among employees and volunteers. They provide safe mechanisms for reporting unethical behavior or misconduct, and importantly, protection from retaliation of reporting those violations. But unfortunately, there will be times when our codes of ethics, no matter how well developed and communicated they are, could be violated. So we have to establish that transparent process for dealing with these ethical issues. And I want to talk now about making these, making our decisions and how we make these decisions. And so to take us back a little bit to ethical decision making as a framework, in most situations, you will be the moral agent. And the moral agent is the person who has to make this decision. I have encountered some situation, and now I have to act or make some sort of action while also conforming to an expected standard of behavior. As the moral agent, you need a level of moral awareness or recognition that a situation has some sort of ethical implication. Some people call it a gut feeling, but being aware that the situation may not be ethical is that first step. Now, the course of action is how we analyze and make that decision to achieve our desired outcome or that intended result. However, this is not quite a linear process. In order for us to have a good, solid course of action, we need to know where we're going to end up. Where do we want to end up first? So in my mind, that moral agent needs to identify the desired outcome before setting that course of action. So we can categorize these ethical situations in a way as to identify the root cause and then go forth and analyze it. So on the graphic I have on the right side of the screen, we start with our ethical issue. And again, that's our moral awareness. Something may have ethical implications. Now, not all of these consequences are negative, and so we're not going to necessarily focus on that part today. What we're going to talk about are those situations where we think something negative could occur. So an ethical problem is an issue where, as we're looking through the process, we think there could be some negative consequences here. An ethical distress, moving a little bit forward here, describes a situation where you, the moral agent, you know something's, you know the right thing to do, but there's something preventing you from taking action. And so there are two kinds of ethical distress. One type occurs when we understand what the barrier is that prevents us from completing that ethically supported course of action. And that could be prohibitive policies or procedures, or financial restraints, personal feelings or biases, or anxiety or fear of the situation. The second type of distress happens when the desired outcome can be identified, but we're having a difficult time identifying the barrier. And if we can't figure out what that barrier is, then we're unable to go forward for the resolution of that situation. And that could be maybe a situation we've never encountered before, or something that's increasingly complex. And the last one I want to talk about is an ethical dilemma. An ethical dilemma means that we have two or more ethically supported courses of actions, but we can't do them all. And so by selecting one course of action, we are going to have an automatic negative consequence because we were unable to take the other course or courses that were available to us. So there are many different ethical decision-making frameworks. The one that I have on the screen is from ASAE. This ethical decision-making model is part of the ASAE Ethics Toolkit, which is currently under construction, thanks to the ASAE Ethics Committee. And so we start on the far left, upper left of the screen, where we have a problem that we encounter. And then this algorithm helps us walk through that situation and identify what steps we need to take based on our responses. I think it's really important to note that the specific model of decision making that we use is less important than the fact that we use a systematic model to make these decisions. We want to make sure that we are unbiased in our analysis, that we gather all of the relevant information, and that we are looking at the situation in as comprehensive a way as possible. So one of the things on this particular flowchart that I've highlighted at the very bottom of the box in yellow on your screen is a bit more information about how we can judge whether or not the action that we're proposing to resolve the situation is ethical. And these are asking us who would be harmed, are there transparency concerns? If I put myself in the shoes of the person who is the recipient of this action, how would I feel about that? Can I justify this action? So I really like that this particular model provides some guidance on making those decisions. So we know that every organization struggles with ethical issues, but it doesn't always make its way out into the public eye. So the next couple of situations are real, but I am trying really hard to de-identify these as much as possible. But these are excellent studies of things to avoid moving forward. So in our first example, this organization is a membership organization with about 10,000 individual members. They received a couple of separate ethics violation complaints against a member. Both of the complaints were about the same situation. And in a concise summary, the member in question posted on social media, contributing to a broader conversation, and called into question the quality of somebody's work. And that had some interesting undertones. And because this person had a large following on social media, the conversation grew legs, let's say. So the interesting part about this is that the person about whom the complaint was filed was also the chair of the ethics committee at this organization. So that person stepped down once the complaints were received, which is the appropriate thing to do, recuse oneself to avoid conflict. The board did review the two complaints and did decide to suspend the member. However, this process took some time, and the action didn't actually occur until about 4 months after the complaints were received. Now, the decision itself caused backlash within the membership, and as a result, the board rescinded the suspension a week later as they wanted to consult with their legal team. They also decided at that time to conduct an independent audit of this process, the reporting process, and how this went through. The audit identified a lot of problems, including the establishment of a separate and allegedly secret ethics committee that handled this complaint. The board did not have open communication about the complaints, and there were some new policies adopted after the violation was reported that were then attributed to the sentencing of the suspension. So within 6 months of the receipt of the complaints, 2 months after the rescinded suspension, the entire board of directors and 2 staff members resigned. And as you can imagine, a lot of drama ensued over the next several years. A new board was installed, and there were some attempts at corrective action that fell short of the goal. And ultimately, the membership declined a great deal. Major exhibitors started to remove themselves from their annual meeting, and they were unable to pay some contracts. So unfortunately, this particular organization, while still in business and hopefully setting some new policies and procedures moving forward, they did have some negative consequence to the way that was handled. In another organization, this organization is one that provides people with disabilities or other special needs services that promote choice, independence, and inclusion. One of their volunteer board members was invited to participate in a radio talk show discussing political issues around the election. On this show, the board member and the talk show host made some disparaging remarks about a public figure's child and perceived disability. Less than a week later, the organization posted a statement on their website addressing the incident, and they immediately convened the board's executive committee. They discussed the issue and unanimously decided to immediately remove the individual from the board. The statement further reiterated the organization's values and commitment to their members. And they aligned this action as an expression of those values. And so the reason that I pull these two particular cases up is that these are really great, very two great examples at opposite ends of the spectrum of how the process of how we handle ethics violations can impact the entire organization. So I want to underscore the importance of those codes of ethics, those policies, what processes are established to deal with ethics violations, and how the organization can ensure that that they're following the processes to an extent that the organization is not harmed. But not every situation that we deal with is so public or so dramatic. Many situations are simply those that make us feel uneasy. And again, these are situations that are encountered on a day-to-day basis. So I have a few case examples. You may have experienced one of these. If you would like to add anything in the chat, that would be great to have a discussion about that. But I have a few situations that we'll talk about, and we'll see how this resonates. So our first situation, you are a communications manager at a professional organization. One of your members reports that an organization staff member has started to post articles on their personal handle about a divisive societal issue. The member who reports this feels that it is inappropriate for the staff member to post these types of articles or this type of information. During your investigation, you note that the staff member also posts relevant information about the association and its products, programs, and services. So what's the issue? Well, we have to be careful about our N of one decisions, right? If one person complains, is that enough for us to make a change with our processes? But at the same time, this gives us an opportunity to do a little bit more digging. What information do I need? So we go to the the staff person's social media post. We have to be very concerned about the fact that we have free speech and that this member or the staff person has that right. What have they posted about our organization? Turns out they're reposting the things that we post at our organization. Hey, we have a new class, or hey, our annual meeting's coming up, or look at the wonderful things our members are doing, those kinds of things. The issue is from the organizational perspective is linking our name with this divisive societal issue. So what are our options? We can ask the person to not post on about our policies. We can ask the person to stop posting about the societal issue. These are some situations that we have to really think through and make sure we're not violating someone's rights. We need to look for some sort of a social media post. A policy. Maybe we have a policy that addresses how personal social media accounts are to be handled with regard to organization business. And of course, the consequences can be pretty significant. Again, we are not to violate any individual's right, but also having the organization's name tied to posts of this nature can be challenging as well. And then we can also avoid this in the future, looking at how we can come together perhaps as a staff team with some legal advice about how we can draft a social media posting policy for our employees. And in some organizations, that extends out to their board members who may or may not do the same. I think I went too far. Nope, here I am. So we work in a large organization in this next scenario, and we need to replace over 100 computers and related equipment. So large IT contract. And we've contracted with a vendor for this work, but we found out after the contract is signed that the IT company owner is a relative of our board's vice president. This was not knowledge that the decision-making group had during the vendor selection process. So what's the issue? At this point, we have a perception of conflict of interest. Did we sign this contract because the board vice president is a relative of the company owner? I would say we didn't, because we didn't know this was a thing. We didn't make the decision because we felt pressured by the board's vice president, but there's a perception that the company is doing, that our organization is doing work with this IT company because of that relationship. At this point, we're assuming that the contract was developed in good faith and that the IT company is doing the work the way that they are supposed to do the work. So changing anything at this point, of course, the contract's already signed, is probably a moot point. But perhaps one of the things that we can do in the future is be a little more directive with our conflict of interest disclosures, especially as we go into new contract for our vendors as well, ensuring that staff and key volunteers have disclosed any kind of relevant conflict or relationship in that situation. The consequences at this point are probably more reputational. Again, assuming that the contract was signed in good faith, the company is likely to do the right thing and do the work in the way that the contract was written, and we're all happy with the outcome. But it does appear that there could be some influence there. So being more proactive with having that particular relationship disclosed and managed, including documenting that perhaps the board vice president was not part of the conversation. And again, these are operational things. So the board vice president should not be, of course, included in these kinds of contracts. But if we needed to, having that documentation of how the vice president had recused themselves from any of these discussions would be an important aspect. And in our last situation, we work for an organization that is gearing up for a major donation campaign. Our organization has really never participated in such an event before, so this is new for us, and we're excited. Our development officer decides to use artificial intelligence programs to generate donor letters. In doing so, they upload information from the member database into a publicly available AI program to generate several hundred donor letters. Now, I don't know about you all, but I kind of like the assistance that AI can give me to make my things look a little bit more professional. The problem here, though, is that the publicly available AI program shares that data. That's how the AI learns, right? Now, I am not going to profess to be an AI specialist or even remotely knowledgeable about the back end workings of AI. What I do know, though, is that including the donor information is a breach of confidentiality because that information is then shared within that system. So the problem here isn't that the development officer decided to use artificial intelligence to help write these letters. That could be very smart and efficient depending on what this person is doing and how they're creating their letters. The ethical issue is the issue with confidentiality by uploading the donor's information into that platform. So our options at this point is to manage the situation as best we can by removing information if we're able to, try to mitigate that breach of confidentiality. We'll need to work with our IT team to look at, or our member team, whoever manages our database, to make sure that we're not seeing any kind of issues there. And avoiding this in the future should be as easy as re-educating persons about how AI works, but also perhaps even a policy about what we can and cannot do within that situation. So to wrap us up, because I'm really interested in what questions you all have, our major take home today, if you take nothing away from today, I would like for everyone to internalize that moral awareness is really that cornerstone of ensuring that we have an ethical work environment. Again, that ability to detect and appreciate the ethical aspects of a decision is really important. And the first step to helping us act ethically and allow us to regularly address ethical issues. But we also must know our policies. What happens if there's an ethical issue within our organization? What do we do with that information if that violation occurs? We have to have a decision-making plan ready to go. This is not something that we want to develop after we receive a violation. We want to have that in place prior to, so that that investigation and response goes very, very smoothly. And regularly reflecting on these ethical issues will strengthen our moral awareness, and having conversations with your colleagues about situations and your impressions and brainstorming of ways to avoid those in the future would be a really great plan. And if you would like to investigate more information, I have a QR code on the screen that goes to the ASAE Standards of Conduct and Ethics Toolkit. I would highly recommend that you go hunt down your organization's codes of ethics and any relevant policies. And ASAE has a lot of reading on ethics. If you type in ethics on the ASAE website, you'll get a bunch of stories, including this one by a couple of our ethics committee members about why the association CEO should serve as the chief ethics officer. I'll leave that up for just a moment so that you can grab those QR codes if you want them, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Shawna. That was great. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in from our participants, I had a question and was wondering if you had an answer on this one. When you're dealing with ethical considerations and it's board to staff or staff to board, how would you go around addressing that? And I will give you an example. I had a client who called me. I do Marcom, but she called me anyway to somebody on her board in a board meeting had worn a political t-shirt advertising somebody's personal politics. And so she called me and she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, here's what I would do. But I was interested from an ethical perspective when you come up with these issues, and it's not even CEO to board chair, which is a different relationship, but it's like director of communications to somebody on the board or another staff member. How would you advise people to deal with that?
So, number one, I'm hoping that there's a policy that covers these things, because that's always a good thing. But I do rely on that board volunteer to volunteer and staff to staff communication and hierarchy. I am not the chief staff executive at my organization, and if one board member came to me to complain about another board member, I would still escalate that through my chief staff executive, so that they could have that conversation with the board chair as well. I think that those are I think that keeping those lines of communication clear and clean are really important. I mean, I might encourage the board member who has an issue with the other board member to also talk with the board chair, because I think it's a much more powerful conversation if that person who has witnessed that behavior is able to talk with that board chair versus me going to my chief staff executive and the third hand telling of a situation, right? But also I'm hoping there's a policy about that they can rely upon so they can go to the person who wore the shirt that was deemed offensive and say, board member, our policy states this, please, please don't do this.
So, Shawna, we do have a question. What if a chair or an officer asks staff to do something against a documented board decision? What can the staff do?
This is a great question. And I also rely on that chain of command reporting that we just talked about. If I had again, as a not chief staff executive person, if I had someone come to me and say, yeah, the board just made this decision, but I want you to do this, I would probably redirect in the moment, and say it was my understanding that the board decision was X, which is opposite of what you've asked me to do. Those are uncomfortable conversations, but I think the respectful redirect is could be helpful, and maybe reframing it in a way that makes the other person say, "Oh, I have asked this person to violate what the board has decided as a body it wants to do." If that person still was insistent, then I would probably escalate that. And again, I think that this article that I have on the screen about why the association CEO should be the chief ethics officer, I think is a really powerful piece, because the chief staff executive at your organization is going to have to be able to deal with these types of situations. Now, I'm hopeful that the board member recognizes, or the chair, or whoever has asked this question recognizes that, wow, I shouldn't ask staff people to do things that are in direct violation of a board directive. But sometimes they have to be redirected into that as well.
Yeah. Another good question, and I might piggyback on this one. How common or uncommon is it for associations to have a specific ethics expert on staff, if not the CEO? Or for associations to have a specific ethics policy or set of guidelines? And the first part of that question made me think, how many, how common is it, do you find in that survey, that staff all the way down understand, like, ethics, those policies permeate the whole organization? And this might be our last question.
So I think that it is uncommon for someone to have a person on staff who is even if not an expert, an ethics resource on staff. For those organizations who employ attorneys, persons with legal degrees, those people are great resources because they can help you out in that way as well. I know the ASAE Ethics Committee has several attorneys on the committee, which is great because they help us understand that line between ethical and legal. Because some of our situations that give us heartburn are actually situations where the legality is in question, as well as ethics. The policies, I'm hopeful it's more common for folks to have policies on ethics, even if they don't have an ethics resource in their organization. It is best practice to have a code of ethics of some sort and a policy on how we will handle violations to that code of ethics. I will say that there is an organization, and it's ECI, and of course now I can't think of the name, Ethics and Compliance Institute, I think, that conduct a survey every year. And one of the surveys that they conducted a couple of years ago, it was right after the pandemic. So I think it was 23 they published it. It was a really phenomenal study that indicated how, and this was through all business, not just nonprofits, but this global business ethics survey with thousands of respondents. And they looked at the trend of who felt more pressure to conform to unethical behaviors. And after the pandemic, the middle manager shot way up. We had fewer resources, or perhaps we laid a bunch of people off, or, we were working remote, or, whatever the pressure was. That survey found that it wasn't the CEO or the executive director that was feeling the pressure to act unethically in that moment. It was the middle manager. And it was a dramatic shift. So I say that to outline that ethics impacts the whole organization. So for someone to say that, only these types of employees need to be concerned about the ethics policy or how the ethics code is written or what happens with a violation or what have you, is erroneous. It is really something that the whole organization, every employee in the organization should take an interest in. Recognizing that not everybody will, and I appreciate that. I personally enjoy the ethics conversation, but it's also not always a clear-cut answer, which can be very challenging. For some of us more linear people, that can be hard.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much today for speaking, Shawna. We really appreciate your time. Thanks to all the participants for bearing with us in our technical difficulties. Thank you, Asha, for arranging the program today. In March, we're going a little bit off the grid with our topic. It's going to be about menopause. So we've not really done a topic like that. So I'm looking forward to hearing the speaker in March and look for the information to promote the session. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.